and welcome to the very start of our 701 fuselage workshop. We have to begin somewhere, and this is the place. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about our table. To build a fuselage, if at all possible, get a 12-foot table. Mine is 4 foot wide by 12 foot in length. It doesn't have to be perfectly flat. In fact, the fuselage itself is anything but flat, and we'll talk more about that later. But having the full 12 feet is going to make it a lot easier when we start assembling the sides and the top onto it, etc. Now, we're starting with 7F2-3, which is the bottom panel. Either side is interchangeable, so you could flip this over. It's symmetrical. So choose the nicer side for the outside. And for the inside, you can choose the side with the printed markings on it, because you won't be able to see this once it's all done. On this surface, draw a center line from the front all the way to the rear. This line will become very useful when we are ready to start squaring things up. Now we're ready to start working with our bulkheads. 7F1-3 and its bigger brother 7F1-4. Before we start using these pieces, let's first draw, using our Sharpie, a center line down the front flat surface. And of course the same with 7F1-4. Accurately down the center of the surface. Our next step with both of these two pieces is to draw a line down the center of each of the flanges on all three sides of both 7F1-3 and 7F1-4. Now, there's a couple of tricks to drawing lines right down the center. We simply need a line drawn in the center of each of these flanges all the way along the edge. Now we can do this by simply measuring the distance, putting some marks using our straight edge and drawing the line, or we actually have a tool which facilitates the drawing of those lines. This is a little plastic gizmo with an adjustable arm, and it's really just a holder for the pen. And by adjusting this arm, I can change the distance between this edge and the pen. Let me show you how this works. Just a little fancy gadget. It's certainly not required, but speeds things up in a production environment. Okay, now we're going to attach our two rear bulkheads, 7F1-3 and 7F1-4, to the rear of our fuselage bottom skin. We're going to look for the pre-drilled holes, and be sure to note your plans in that the flanges must be set properly on the two of these. In other words, the inside flanges are pointing to each other, and this is the way they're going to end up setting, right over the pre-drilled holes. The easiest way to drill through the pre-drilled holes and into the flange is to do something like this. Pick up the skin and flip it over, and now by doing it this way we can drill through the holes and into the flange. Of course, the center line is on the flange here, and by placing the pre-drilled holes over it, I can see that line through the center. And then drill straight through into the flange. Now, one thing we want to be sure is that the center line on the bottom of the fuselage matches with the center line we made onto the bulkhead, so that I know I have it exactly centered in both directions, fore and aft and back and forth. And then I'm just going to go ahead and drill the holes using these as guides. I'm going to start off with the number 40 drill, which is the smallest, and then enlarge it up to the size 30, which is where we want to be. For our next step, we're going to attach L angles to the bottom of the fuselage skin. In order to do that, we need to turn the entire fuselage skin over on its other side so that the top of the bottom of the fuselage skin is against the table. So flip it all the way over. Okay, now that we have it flipped over, you should locate the pre-drilled holes. One is here and one set is here that goes across the bottom of the fuselage, and that's where we're going to attach our L angles. These come in 4-foot lengths. First, to mark the bottom of the L angle with a center line. Use our center marking tool and draw a center line down it. The reason we're going to do that is we're going to slip this underneath the skin and look through the pre-drilled holes for our center line so that we can drill this very precisely. Let's take a look at that. Okay, be sure to find the pre-drilled holes. Use your plans if you're not sure where those are located. And then using a piece of angle, L angle, you don't have to cut it yet. We'll cut that later. Make sure the bend is facing towards the front of the fuselage as the plans indicate, and our center line is drawn along the bottom. We're going to slip this underneath, just like this, and we can use some clamps if that makes it easier. And I'm adjusting the L angle so that I can see the line through the bottom of the pre-drilled holes. And that way, I will use the pre-drilled holes as my drilling template and start with a first number 30 size drill and then move up to size 40. And I will repeat this for the next L angle towards the front of the fuselage. So let's do our both 2 L angles. Then after we're done, we can, of course, flip the whole skin back over again. And of course, where it overhangs the edge of the skin, we're going to mark that with our marker so that we can trim that off after we're all finished. And then I will clean this up with my file, and then I will be able to place it precisely where it's supposed to go, and I will use my clecos to cleco this down then. And we'll repeat this step then for the next L that is towards the next set of pre-drilled holes forward in the forward direction. Once you have completed the two L angles, the next step is to use a Z angle, and that will be located at the aft section of the opening. The only important thing here to watch is that the lip of the Z angle gets towards the back. It gets orientated so the lip is towards the back, away from the opening. And once again, you want to draw a line down the center of the flange, and we're going to insert it underneath the skin. And once again, look for that center line through the holes, and go ahead and drill and cleco. Now we are ready to install our longerons 7F3-1 to the bottom edges of our fuselage. Now we're going to take one of our 7F3-1s. We need to look at it carefully and notice that one side is longer than the other side. We want the longer side down on the bottom. So make sure you use the longer side as the bottom when putting it along the fuselage skin. Now what we want to talk about is where to start along the edge with our first longeron. If you start at the back and measure forward along the bottom edge of the skin, you will come to a spot 1785 millimeters approximately. It is at this location that we want to find 3 holes located about 20 millimeters apart from each other. And this is where we're going to place the beginning of one of our longerons. Remember, we want the larger 22 millimeter width, not the thinner 20 millimeter width. We want the 22, the larger side, down. And we're going to place this under the fuselage skin, and we're going to locate it approximately at the 1785. That's measured from the rear. The rear of the fuselage skin is this way. So if we put our tape measure and mark off 1785, we will find the 3 holes, and what we want to do is use that hole as the first hole we're going to drill into our longeron. So our first step is to place a line 10 millimeters from the edge of our longeron. Just draw a line 10 millimeters from the edge. The reason we're going to do that is we're going to place this under the skin so we can see that line in that last of the 3 holes. So the 1785 is approximately the end of our longeron. But clearly we want to make sure when we drill through this small hole in the fuselage skin that we are a good 10 millimeters from the end of the longeron. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that underneath and get that lined up so I can see the line through that hole. We're going to use the full length of that longeron, and what that will do is place the other end just beyond the edge of the fuselage skin, and that's okay. We're going to cut that off much later. The idea is to place the longeron under the skin, up tight to the edge, but not so tight that the skin starts to climb up the radius of the longeron. So we want it all the way in, but not jammed up tight there. We want to make sure that the skin sits nice and flat along the bottom and doesn't start to ride up the corner in there. And so we're going to use the holes in the skin as our drilling template and drill and cleco along the edge. What we want to do is drill every other hole, keeping the longeron pushed against the skin. Now, what's very interesting about the design of the fuselage is that although our longeron is a straight piece of angle, the skin is not. The skin is curved. So as we work our way along here, we're going to want to keep bending this tight to the skin. So the longeron will curve as we drill and cleco to the skin. That gives the fuselage tremendous strength by not having it a straight line, but rather a curve. So it is a gentle curve from front to the middle to the rear, kind of bows out. So again, we want to make sure that we keep the longeron tight. So I'm going to drill and cleco every other hole, and then I'll come back and drill the other holes that I haven't drilled yet. I like to drill with number 40 size drill and then cleco, and then I will go back and fill in the holes that I have not drilled with the number 40 drill, and then I'll go back and drill them out to the final size of size 30, and then put in the copper colored cleco to hold it in. The very last couple inches of the fuselage bottom do not get drilled until much, much later. We'll leave those alone for now. Now I have the rear longeron all completed. This is kind of what it looks like. The only other issue to keep in mind is make sure you keep that longeron tight to the skin, even back towards those rear bulkheads. If necessary, you can take off the bulkheads while you're attaching the longeron after you first fit them. And now we're ready to mount the front longeron on that very same side. So I'm going to grab another section of longeron. And here's the front of the rear longeron we just installed. Here are the 3 holes. Now I've laid my new longeron out here, and remember, making sure I have the wider part of the longeron towards the bottom. I first mark a line 10 millimeters from the end, just like I did before. And what I'm going to do now is look through this last of the 3 holes and put the line underneath that 3rd hole so that I can see through it. So what I've done is I have overlapped the front longeron, this guy here, and that line is now visible through that third hole. These 3 holes will get drilled to an A5 size. That size 20 drill for an A5 rivet. The rest of the longeron holes end up being A40, the drill size of 30 for an A4 rivet size. And then, of course, all I need to do is go and drill every other hole, like I did before, all the way up towards the front. By the time you are all done, the very front So following the plans, we want to draw a line 10 millimeters below each of the 2 edges. And then we need to lay out where we're going to drill our holes for the A4 rivet. So we're going to use our size 30 drill bit. And these need to be spaced an even 20 millimeters apart. Again, look at the plans. Use your rivet fan and space your rivet fan so that each of the ends are 20 millimeters apart, and that way it's very easy to quickly come up with the spacing for the 20 millimeters across. Each of the end locations should be no closer than 10 millimeters from the edge, respecting the 10 millimeters from the edge distance. So we're going to do that the same on both sides, and actually this will be flipped. This will be the top, because looking at the plans, 55 millimeters from the bottom along the center line will be where we're going to drill our hole for the torque tube. And I left off the 2 holes for rivets because the circle will be right in the way of that. So I'm going to go over to my drill press and drill out these with a number 30 drill bit. And then we're going to prepare to drill our 1 1/8 inch hole right here. But we're going to hold off on doing that until we get this mounted onto 7F61. Also, you should point out that 7F6-1 has a top and bottom. The top is a 90-degree angle. The bottom, you can't really see here, is a much sharper angle, more of a closed angle. This has to go on the bottom of the fuselage. This will go on the top. And that becomes important when we go to mount this on the top. We want to make sure we got the top where the hole is going to be located. So I'm going to go drill this on the drill press where I've marked off with a number 30 hole, because this will take A4 rivets as in our plans. Okay, I drilled all of my number 30 holes for the A4 rivets. I now am going to mount the bearing onto the channel itself. Now, before you do that, you want to very carefully mark the exact center from one end to the other, find the exact center on the top, and with that mark, we're going to be able to line up our plate just right. And the idea here then is that I'm going to clamp the plate onto the channel and then drill through each of the holes and cleco them down, because eventually this plate, this bearing plate, will be riveted to the channel, and then we will drill our 1 1/8 inch hole right at the location 55 millimeters up from the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and drill these and attach them. Okay, I got that lined up to the center, so the torque plate is centered from left to right, and I got it clamped securely. And there we go. Got the torque plate attached just nicely, and we want this attached nice and securely because we're going to, at this intersection, drill our 1 1/8 inch hole. We're going to drill the hole through both pieces at the same time so that we get a nice clean hole. And the tool of choice to do that will be a regular paddle bit, 1 1/8 inches. And because this is soft aluminum, it should work very nicely. We need a nice clean hole. Let's go over to the drill press. We got our paddle bit, 1 1/8, chucked into our drill press. I've got the channel sitting on a solid block of wood underneath. You can't see it, but that's important to support the underneath there. So I do have that supported with a nice piece of wood. I've also got a pilot hole started so that the paddle bit knows exactly where to start in the metal there also. And that has removed the first, or the outer, the bearing metal. And we'll remove that. And we got a beautiful hole. And I just have to remove the wood and we're all set, a nice clean hole. And now we're ready to mount 7F6-1 to the bottom of the fuselage skin. It's going to be located along the pre-drilled holes right in front of the access area. Now, of course, we want to make sure that we understand the top from the bottom. The bottom has the sharper angle, and it's going to be located just like this. Now, the easiest way to do this, of course, is, you know the routine by now. Draw a center line down the bottom of the channel, and then we're going to flip our fuselage bottom over, and that way we can place this channel underneath and drill through the pre-drilled holes and into the bottom of the channel. Our next step after installing the 7F61 are the Z channels. Now those will be installed on each side of the opening. And what you want to do is use the Z material. Comes in 4-foot lengths. You want to cut it to size to fit between the channel and the back L back here. And it will end up using the pre-drilled holes along the side of the opening. Sometimes this can be more easily cut using a metal bandsaw, or you can use your snips. Your snips does tend to make a little bit of a mess of the edge because of all the angles in there. But once you get that cut, once again, draw a line down the center of the bottom flange for the full length, and then you'll be able to see that line through the pre-drilled holes. And for these two Z angles, the top of the Z, the lip of the Z, is towards the opening. So one will go here, and again, you're going to flip the entire fuselage skin over so that you can see and drill through the pre-drilled holes in the bottom of the skin and drill into the Z channel. And then another piece of similar size will go over on the other side on the pre-drilled holes. So let's get started doing that. We're going to start installing the doubler on the pilot side at the front of the fuselage. This is going to end up being installed down here. Now, the front edge is going to be even with the front edge of the bottom skin of the fuselage. If it's longer than that, you will need to trim this off, but we want this to be even with the front edge. Because the side skin of the plane will be installed inside here, we need to take a scrap piece of 16 thousandths aluminum and insert it in between here. Okay? So what this is going to do is give us the spacing, the proper spacing between the doubler and the edge of the angle longeron. So we got the edge flush with the front of the bottom skin. We have a piece of 16 thousandths temporarily placed in here, and I'm going to clamp this together. And now, the last thing we need to do before we do any drilling is to make sure that we push the longeron in, all the way in, because remember, it's got movement because we took out the clecos from the bottom. And by holding that all the way in fact, you can use another clamp before you do your drilling, we're going to drill through the holes in the longeron, and that will we'll use those as the guide holes. I'm going to start off, of course, drilling with number 40 and then enlarge them. All of these rivets are going to be A5, so we'll use a number 20 drill when we're done, but you can start with the small and go up to the large. And then the same with the holes that you already have drilled in the longeron underneath here. Those are going to be opened up for a size A5 rivet or a number 20 drill bit. So the important thing is to make sure you have your temporary skin as a spacer, 16 thousandths, to emulate the side skin of the aircraft, and then to be sure to push the longeron all the way in so that when you drill through the hole down there, you have the longeron lined up with the holes in the skin, and then that will guide the drill bit into the doubler. Do not drill any holes along the leading edge. Those will be attached later, but certainly we want the 6 holes along the edge here and the pre-existing holes that you've drilled in the angle underneath. And you can feel free to trim the longeron even with the front of the skin, and that'll make everything look nice We'll wait for the side until we get the fuselage side connected in here, but certainly we can trim along the bottom here. While we're almost done with our bottom fuselage construction, we do need to make a couple of small holes in our rear bulkhead frames. Right here, and then one back here. The plans call for 60 millimeters down, 20 millimeters in on the large one, and 30 millimeters down, 20 millimeters in on the small one. The idea is with these holes, which we're going to drill at 7/16, we're going to install a small grommet, and the idea is we can then route our wires from our tail light, if you have one, and our elevator trim control cable through these holes and up to the forward end of the fuselage. Easiest way to make these holes will be to use one of these unistep drill bits, or you can use a regular drill bit, but we want a 7/16 hole, or whatever size hole necessary for the grommet you have that will go in there. And we need, of course, to remove the frames from the bottom fuselage so we can lay them flat while drilling these holes. We're going to set aside our bottom fuselage skin and bring out the sides of the fuselage, that's 7F2-2. Now both the left and the right of the fuselage use identical copies of 7F2-2, so it doesn't matter which one you use for the left or the right. The difference is how you position them. Using your plans, make sure you understand what the bottom is and what the top is of the fuselage sides. Of course, the front is where it's the widest and the rear is where it's narrow. But choose which direction you want so that the better side is towards the outside of the fuselage and the printed side, or the side with the more scratches, is on the interior side. Before performing any drilling on your side skins, it is most important to examine the two sheets carefully, using your plans, and identify which is the pilot side, which is the passenger side, and label them, including which is the outside and which is the inside, and what edge is the top versus what edge is the bottom. It's very easy to get these confused because the left and right side are mirrors of each other, and it's easy to put the L angles and the longerons on the wrong side and create yourself a real mess. Our very first step is going to be to attach the 3 L stiffeners to the inside using the pre-drilled holes on the skin. Just like we did on the bottom, we're going to flip the skin over, place the stiffener underneath, and drill through the holes. The other thing I should mention, if you look at the plans carefully, the edges of the L stiffener for the 2 rear stiffeners aim forward, and the L stiffener towards the front, its bend aims rearward. Just check your plans to be sure you understand how they go like that. So complete both side skins, label them left and right, label the top and the bottom, and drill and cleco your 3 L stiffeners, just like you did the bottom fuselage skin. In this next stop, you're going to feel a bit of deja vu. We're now ready to attach the longerons to the top of the side skin. So make sure you got the top edge, and then from the rear, measure forward to about 1,475 millimeters, and you will find 3 holes spaced close to each other. This is just the bottom skin, except now we're dealing with the inside of the top of each of the side skins. And what we're going to do then is take a longeron, and remember, we want the long edge of the longeron to be on top and the smaller edge to be along the side. And we're going to mark a line 10 millimeters from the edge, and we are then going to place that line so that we can see it through the last of these 3 holes just prior to the 1,475 millimeter mark. And the idea then is that we can attach this just like we did the longeron for the bottom of the skin. And there will be quite a bit hanging over the edge when we're all done here. Quite a bit hanging over the edge, but that's okay. That'll get trimmed off later. There, I finished drilling all of the every other holes, and then came back with the drill and filled in all of the holes in between and opened them up for an A4 rivet, drill size 30. And now it is time to make the splice with the forward longeron. I've drill line 10 millimeters from the end. I'm going to place that line so that I can see it through the 3rd hole. Overlapping the rear longeron, and of course making sure that this edge is the 22 millimeter or the long side so that it matches up with this one. And I'm going to go ahead then and drill all of the holes, every other hole forward. And there's the front longeron completed and drilled to the top of the side skin. Now your job is to do this all again for the other side. In order to help us later locate the longeron onto the top fuselage skin, we want to place a mark. Now the way to do this is locate the series of holes that the 7F13 bulkhead frame attaches to on the side skin, and place a ruler along those holes all the way down to the longeron, and then place a mark down here. This mark will help us line up the longeron to the top fuselage skin where it meets the top of 7F13. So we'll use that mark later. Do this on, of course, both side skins. I have the passenger side skin on the table, and I'm preparing to attach the longeron to the bottom. Now the easiest way to do this is to remove the bottom longeron, which is currently attached to your bottom fuselage skin. Take it right off the skin, and we're going to attach it to this bottom of the side skin. Now before we remove the longeron from the bottom of the fuselage, we want to mark the fuselage bottom so that we can accurately line it up. And one of the marks we want to make is the very aft edge of where the longeron is going to sit, so that our side skin and our bottom skin line up exactly in relation to the longeron that we are about to transfer from the bottom skin to the side skin. I have removed the bottom back longeron on the pilot side of the bottom skin and brought it up to my table where I have the pilot side skin, and this is the bottom of the pilot side skin. And what I'm going to do is take the longeron, which I just removed from the bottom skin, and line up my mark, which I just drew. And remember, this line was the very trailing edge of the bottom skin. And I'm going to attach this to, I'm going to line this up along the bottom skin and get that line to set up, because the corner of the bottom of the side skin does in fact line up with the bottom corner of the bottom skin. If you look at your plans, you'll see that. And now I can go through and drill through the pre-drilled holes along the skin of the side skin. And what this will allow me to do is synchronize the position of the longeron with both the side skin and, of course, the drilled holes that I already made for the bottom skin. Now, it is important to get this lined up, because you're only going to have one chance once you start drilling. You won't be able to move this back and forth anymore. And here's another view of what I'm doing. I've taken the longeron off the bottom skin on the pilot side, and the mark I made was right here, which was the very back edge of the bottom skin, and I'm going to line that up with the back end corner of the side skin. And I'm going to proceed to drill. And I'm going to proceed to drill every other hole into the longeron, just like I did before, all the way forward to the very front. And of course, I'll repeat that for the other longeron on the bottom skin and attach that to the bottom of the other side skin. Another method to verify that you have the longeron in the proper position to the side skin is, in addition to lining up the rear of the skin with the mark you made, to also take a look at the holes in the side skin, which are going to be eventually drilled to the rear bulkhead. The very bottom hole here should line up with the hole in the bottom of the longeron, which also attach to the bottom of the bulkhead. So when these holes line up, you also have confirmation that the position of the longeron is proper in relation to the side skin. It is now time to take the bottom fuselage skin and remove all of the longerons, the L angles, and everything else that's clecoed on it, and begin deburring every single hole and applying primer as necessary. You can then reassemble all of the longerons and L angles back on, but only use clecos. We will rivet a little bit later. This would be a good time to go ahead and rivet the bearing onto 7F6-1. I'm going to use a pneumatic riveter. That certainly is a great way to rivet quickly. Now it's time to deburr and prime the side skins. Now we won't deal with the longerons on the top yet because we haven't drilled them for the top. So we're talking really just about the L angles, deburring all the holes for the L angles and along the top and bottom. And if you're doing the priming, then what we're talking about is priming the very edge on the outside where the longeron will butt up against, where the longeron will touch along the sides on the top and bottom. And we need to do that to both side skins. This would be a good time to lay 7F13 and 7F14, your rear bulkhead frames, against your side skin and make sure that they are the correct height. You'll notice mine here, I'm going to have to trim off a few millimeters from the top in order for it to fit properly along the side skin. If I didn't trim this off, you'd have a lot of trouble getting the top of the fuselage skin on. Now we want to begin by placing the top skin of our fuselage on our workbench. And you can use either side. I use the side with the printing for my inside. Be sure you understand which side is which and go ahead and label the appropriate side that you've chosen. Pilot side versus passenger side. And then you want to remove the longerons from your side skin from the appropriate side and lay them next to the top skin. Because once again we are going to use the same technique we did before and attach our longerons and drill and clecal them through the pre-drilled holes in the skin. Now, one of the most important things we need to do is to line up the longerons at the right location to the top skin. And there's a couple of ways to check this. One of the easiest ways to get the longeron in the proper position in relation to the top skin is to locate the splice section and those three holes that are very close to each other and line them up with the top skin along with the three holes in your longeron. As a verification that this is the right location, move down to where the horizontal tail bulkhead crosses the top skin, and you should find that the pre-drilled holes in the top skin for the top of that bulkhead line up with the mark you made previously on your longeron. You can then drill using every other hole through the pre-drilled holes in the skin and drill and cleco the longeron to both edges of the top skin. Once you have finished drilling both longerons, remove them, deburr all the holes on both sides, and prime. You can then remove them because next we're going to add the L angles. And now on the top skin, we need to install our angles. Now, looking at the plans, you should notice there are 4 of them. And please note that the rear one, the bend goes forward, the next one goes forward, the next one goes backwards, and then the most forward one goes forward. This is on your plans, but we need to cut and install the 4 angles. Use the same technique as on the other side. Flip the panel over and slip them underneath, trim them, drill them through the pre-drilled holes in the skin, then deburr them, prime them, and then prime the skin after you deburr all of the holes. And then we're going to get ready to assemble this whole fuselage all together. In preparation for assembling the fuselage together, we want the bottom skin on your table. I recommend removing the L angles from the bottom for now. We can reattach those after we get the side skin on. We also need a brace, an L brace. Now, you can make this simply out of a shelving standard or other bracket attached to your table, and it needs to be about 3 feet tall. What that's going to do is hold up the side of the fuselage skin temporarily while we get it aligned. I've also removed the rear bulkhead frames from the back and have set those aside for now. And we're ready now. I have the longerons attached with clecos to the bottom of the bottom skin, and I have attached the top longerons to the sides, the left and right fuselage skin sides. And we need to place the fuselage skin in between our vertical temporary bracket and the bottom fuselage skin. It sure helps to have 2 people do this. The top longeron on the side skin makes it a lot stiffer and easier to handle. And your goal is to slide the bottom of the fuselage skin inside the longeron. And again, a second person will help you do this. Make sure you have a bracket, a clamp available to clamp just lightly and temporarily the fuselage skin to your vertical support, and that way you are allowed to walk away from it. Once you have lined up the skin with the longeron, you can go ahead and put in a few clecos. We can go ahead and install now the rear bulkhead frames. Now, where the L's intersect at the corners, you'll find that they don't fit real good because of the angles. So what we need to do is to adjust them ever so much. Right now, I can't get this in. This part needs to be bent back, and this part needs to be bent down. So what I'm going to do is very gently bend this back a bit, and bend this one back a bit. And there we have a better fit. We're going to end up putting a gusset on each of the corners where the L's intersect. So you want to go ahead and adjust the other end of this L in the same way, so that when we put on the other side skin, it'll have a better chance of mating up. So make sure all of your L's get a nice fitting like this, so that we can put a flat piece of metal on top of that a little bit later. Okay, in preparation for the other side skin, we've made sure that we've clamped the rear bulkheads to the side skins. We'll drill them a little bit later. We have our L's installed, and we've also prepared our second brace to support the side skin on the other side. So now we can go ahead and install the side skin on the other side. Certainly this would be easier with two people. And once again, our goal is to line up the holes in the longeron with the holes in the bottom of the skin. And we want to use a clamp up here also to keep this attached. If the top longerons are touching each other at the top, feel free to go and trim off a few inches. Now we're going to attach the sides of our rear bulkhead horizontal tail frames to the side skin. We're going to be looking for the line that we drew on the center of the side flange of the frame of the bulkhead, appearing through the pre-drilled holes in the skin. When we find the line, we'll go ahead and drill those holes out, starting with our number 40 drill and then opening them up to number 30 for an A4 rivet. And then we need to do the same with the front frame, looking for the line on the flange through the pre-drilled holes. Now you need to do the same on the other side. Now you probably noticed the diagonal holes between the two bulkheads, and it is on these holes that we need to install an L angle. The L angle will be installed inside from the corner to corner of the two frames. It's best to position the angle and then you can mark it near the top. It may take one or two attempts at getting the size right so that it fits. Make sure you draw a line down the middle of the flange so that you can see the line through the pre-drilled holes in the skin. And you might have to hit and miss with the length. And notice I have a interesting angle at the top here. The goal is to get this angle to fit as snug as possible from each corner to the other corner. It may take a few tries to get it just right. Don't feel bad if you have to sacrifice an angle to get it right. Once you do get the right shape and length, it should be able to transfer that for making the other angle for the other side. All right, we're looking at the top of the fuselage at the rear here, and right above the top edges of the two bulkheads, we need to install an L angle. Now, it's important that the angle be installed properly. The one on the rear gets installed with the flange going forward to the front of the plane, and then the L angle on here gets installed with the angle going towards the back like that. Okay, if you look at the plans, it makes it very clear. And I've already cut one for here, so this one will be installed just like this. So the top is going to be flush with the top of the bulkhead and underneath the two longerons. And then we'll have holes drilled to attach it to the bulkhead. Now, when installing this for the smaller one, because of the cutout, I had to produce a cutout. If you notice, I had to notch this angle to match up with the notch in here. So if you need to notch it, go ahead and do that so that it fits just like this. Now, the easiest way to install this properly is to use a clamp. And after you got your angle clamped, after you got your angle cut, you want to clamp it to the top of the longeron, drill through the angle into the top of the bulkhead. And so the same with over here. You would want to clamp it to the longeron here on both sides. Make sure you look at your plans if you have any doubt as to how this is installed. The idea is that you will have it flush with just under the edge of the longerons, and then you can drill, in the case of this one, 6 holes along the edge. Try and watch your edge distance, 10 millimeters, through the angle and into the top of the bulkhead. So after you get a couple of holes started to match the frame up, then remove both bulkheads, and you want to deburr and prime all of the holes in the bulkheads and in the skin of the holes you drilled for the sides and the angle between the two bulkheads. And go ahead and rivet after deburring and priming, you can go ahead and rivet the L angles to the top of the bulkheads, reinstall everything and cleco them up, and then we're going to be ready to attach the top on. If you have enough clecos, you can place them every second, third, or fourth hole and get the entire fuselage all clecoed together. The most challenging spot will be to cleco up all of the holes at the rear where our bulkheads are located. And that'll be a nice tight fit, but that should fasten up just fine. And feel free to clip the ends of the longerons. Clip them long. We will shorten them up to the exact size later, but you can feel free to knock them off at this time to within about an inch of the ends. Our next step is going to be to prepare to drill the holes on top of each of the bulkheads. Now, before we drill through these pre-drilled holes, we want to square up the fuselage, because drilling those holes are going to make the fuselage much more rigid, especially at the rear. So what we want to do is go to the front of our fuselage and get it squared up before we drill those holes. Here's the front of our fuselage. As you'll notice, a lot of these clecos will have to be removed soon when we go to rivet, and you'll simply have to crawl in there. It's recommended placing a pad of some sort on those metal skins so that you also don't accidentally sit on the L angles going across. But you'll be able to reach all of those clecos to remove them. Also, you need, if you haven't already, to attach the L angles to the top skin if they were not attached when you installed the top skin. Now, remember, we drew a center line down the top and the bottom skin of the fuselage. The purpose for that was to be able to square up our fuselage. I have a plumb bob hanging from the very center of the top skin by a string. In fact, one of the holes in the top skin is in the dead center, and I fed that through the hole. And by watching where the end of the plumb bob sits above the center line, you can tell that the fuselage is not square. And we don't expect it to be after simply assembling it with the clecos. And even after we rivet all of the longerons, it will still not be centered. Now, I can push the top of the fuselage over, and I'm simply racking the fuselage and get it to be centered. Now, obviously, we want to be able to hold the fuselage in this correct position before we start drilling those rear bulkheads. So what I recommend doing is to use a stick or other object. And what I found kind of useful was a 48-inch level, plastic level. And I'm going to jam it carefully until the fuselage is leveled. Now, if you'll notice, I check the plumb bob now, see if you can see this, but I have now got my fuselage square and can go ahead and drill the rear bulkhead. Now we have the rear bulkhead top drilled, both the rear and the front. Now all you need to do is remove the two top longerons, uncleco them, and you can peel back this top back skin. Just peel it up so that you are able to deburr the top of the bulkheads and the bottom of the skin. Once you have done that, you are now ready to start riveting all of the longerons, all four of them, top and bottom, both sides. There's just a couple of places you do not want to rivet. Let's review those. And you might as well mark them on your fuselage so you don't accidentally rivet them. One section that does not get riveted is at the very front. Don't rivet these guys because we have things inside that will need to attach to them. So on both sides at the front, those rivets should not be touched. And on the top skin at the very front, these rivets should not be, these holes should not be riveted until later. Although the majority of rivets on your fuselage skin are A4, do take note, after looking at your plans, how A5 rivets are to be used on the forward sections of all four corners of the fuselage, on the longerons, both top and bottom. Not only are these A5, but remember, we're not going to rivet these at this time due to additional components that will be attached. And don't forget, these A5 rivets are used on both the top and bottom of the longerons also. And don't forget to install these guys before putting in your rivets. And don't forget also that these are the A5 rivets for the doubler here. A good technique to use when riveting is to always make sure the hole you're about to rivet is bridged by clecos on both sides. So in other words, if we want to rivet this hole, it's a good idea to have a cleco over here. That way the parts are held together nice and strong. Go ahead and rivet that, and then you can remove the clecos as necessary to another location. But this is the best way to progress through all of the riveting, is by moving the clecos and riveting and bridging them with clecos as you go. So we want to catch all of the longerons, both sides. Don't forget the L angles at the various locations of the fuselage. So you have quite a bit of riveting to do. When you need to rivet the bottom longeron, feel free to move the fuselage to the edge of the table so that you can grab the very bottom longeron from over the edge of the table, and you can get your rivet gun over there. Should also point out that even though the majority of all the rivets are the A4 size, do not forget that at the splice locations is where we have our A5 rivets, where the longerons overlap. Otherwise, the rest of those holes are the A4 size. If in doubt, don't forget to check your plans. Now, you want to be able to hold the fuselage exactly center like this, and square, I guess is a better word, because what we're going to do next now is to install gussets at the corners of where our structure comes together, namely the L angles. And we're going to put one at virtually each of the corners where the L angles come together. For example, on the right side, we'll put one here, And then all the way at the back, we're going to put one down there, and also up at the top. So let's get started with doing this. Our first step is to produce the gussets themselves out of 25,000 scrap aluminum sheet. And here's the gusset we want to make. It's basically 50 millimeters by 50 millimeters on both sides. And we need to drill 3 pilot holes. I used a number 40 drill bit to start these. And each hole is 10 millimeters in from the corner. Again, check your plans. And we're going to need 10 of those. And again, we're just going to cut those out of scrap 25 thousandths aluminum sheet. The right is the normal gusset we talked about. On the left, we want to make 2 that look like this, and those will be used on the bottom of the farthest most back L angle bulkhead back there. Now, assuming you have your fuselage exactly squared up using the plumb bob we talked about, you want to place your very first gusset right here. Now, I've just laid this against L angle going up the side and the Z angle going along the bottom. And we basically want to use the 3 holes and drill into the L angle on the side and the Z angle on the bottom, holding it nice and tight. In fact, you can use a clamp to make sure you get a nice tight fit. And there I put a clamp on it, and I can align that. Now, you are going to have to start climbing into the fuselage to get to that, and feel free to put a pad down here so that you can kneel on it and not damage the Z's on either side. And again, be careful when climbing on here. Don't have any parts or pieces underneath the aluminum or they'll get all bent up and everything. So just be careful. Go ahead and lean in there. You're going to eventually have to get way down into the back, but by getting this corner, and then we'll get the opposite corner, we'll start to really strengthen up the fuselage. And of course, notice that we're going to maintain the squareness of the fuselage at all times. And once we get those corner gussets in, the fuselage will become much more rigid. So I'm going to go ahead and drill and cleco in the gussets. When I'm done at this corner, I'm going to go to the opposite corner and do the same thing with another gusset. And same with the other side. Notice we will not use any gussets on the top of that first ring of L angles, just on the bottom. And put some pads down on the bottom so that you can crawl in and add the 8 remaining gussets to the next set of angles, both top and bottom. Okay, here's what the completed gussets should look like. Here's the first one at the bottom left. And remember, at the top we do not use a gusset on our first L because the back of this luggage compartment will go there. And then there's the next section of L's going towards the back, top and bottom. And then all the way at the rear, recall that we use our special cutout gusset at the bottom and a normal one up at the top, left and right. We are ready to install the back panel for the baggage area, which will finally square up the fuselage in a permanent type of way. So before we do that, one of the easiest ways to get the cabin finally square after your gussets are in is to place back your diagonal member to get everything square. But instead of using the plumb bob, let us measure from corner to corner of the fuselage, and that will be our final test as to how square we got it. For example, I'm going to measure from up in this corner all the way down to this corner and take a reading. In my example, I have 150 millimeters. I have 1,500 millimeters. Exactly. And then I will take a reading from the opposite corner. And I also have exactly 1,500. So this is a yet better test of its squareness, and I can readjust as necessary. I want to have this as accurately square as I can prior to installing the back panel. And I will leave it in place while I install the back panel and rivet it on. And here's the baggage compartment back. The lip at the bottom will be towards the front, and you may have to trim the width to the proper size to fit within the fuselage. I had to trim mine a little bit. You want a good fit. Once you've trimmed it and it will fit in there, then you want to mark a 10 millimeter line from the edge. You want to mark a line 10 millimeters from the edge, and then mark off your rivet locations 40 millimeters apart. And I'm going to pre-drill these locations with the size 40 drill bit. And then when I install it into the fuselage, I'll be able to use those holes as a template guide to drill into the L angles of the fuselage. Now we have the baggage back installed and clamped in its location. I double-checked the diagonal measurement from corner to corner to make sure you have it squared, and then begin at the center and start drilling through the pre-drilled holes that you just made in the back, and drill to the left and then drill to the right. And then drill down through the holes, drilling every other hole, and then clecoing, then coming back and drilling the other holes. By the time you have finished this, you can then remove the back, deburr, prime, and then install with rivets. And your cabin will be very rigid and very square. You can certainly pull the fuselage forward over the edge of the table, and then you can work through the access hatch. Makes it a little easier. Now, some of the rivets are awfully hard to get to with the automatic riveter, so I'm going to use a hand rivet to make sure I get the rivets nice and tight and flat all the way around the edge. Now we're ready to install the uprights 7F5-4. This does have two different sides to it. The side with the opened angle, the angle that's a little more open than the other, is going to go against the sidewall. Okay? And just like we've always done, on the edge that's going to be drilled on, I've marked a center line down the flange. And I'm going to look through the pre-drilled holes in the skin, and looking at your plans, you can locate its exact position. It's going to go in right here with the opening facing us. The top is going to go against our L angle. We're going to drill A5 size holes all the way along its length through the side skin, all the way down. And we will cleco that. And measure and cut an L angle to span between the upright and the vertical L angle at the back of the luggage compartment. And use the pre-drilled holes in the side skin with A4s. In addition, at the very top of the upright, you should mark and drill 2 A4 holes to tie the upright into the top L angle running across the top skin. And repeat the installation of the upright and the horizontal L angle on the other side of the fuselage. And we will just leave these clecoed at this time. And at the bottom of the upright, we want to add a small L angle that extends from the cabin side all the way over to the cabin cutout area, and then use 2 A4 rivets where the L angle meets the bottom of the upright. And we'll cleco those in place. Next, we're going to install 7F810B. It's a Z channel, and we're going to ultimately install this approximately right here. But before we do that, we want to clamp it in location because we need to do some special trimming to it. Now, I have trimmed it lengthwise so that it will fit in between the fuselage side skins. And then, in either direction, it doesn't matter which direction, I'm clamped it to the uprights. And the reason I want to do this is that I need to make a mark where the upright edge intersects the upright, and on the other side it looks like this. Okay, we've taken the channel over to the bench, and what we're going to do now is, using this mark, drill a small hole, and then we're going to open it up, the hole that is, to 1/4 inch. Okay, I've just drilled a small hole right into the center of the groove there. And then I'm going to open this up to a larger size using a 1/4 inch drill bit, or in my case, I'm using the stepper bit. And there we go, got a 1/4 inch hole. Now I'm going to turn this around, and at the same location down here, using a straight edge here, mark the location, and again I'm going to drill a small hole and then open it up to a 1/4 inch. These are relief holes, and you'll see in a minute what's going to happen here. Okay, 2 1/4 inch holes. Now, what we are going to do is remove the flange from both sides. So, what I can do is draw a line something like this. Okay, that line there, and then on the other side, same thing. And what we're going to do now is cut the flange off. And in fact, the other side of the cut will be right here. So this part will be removed on both sides. Remember, that was the original mark we made, so that would fit between the two uprights. Okay, and that's exactly what it was we wanted. We're going to do that to the other side. And there we go. Now I'll clean up these holes just a little bit, but this is exactly what we want, and we're going to perform this on both sides. And I'm going to clean up the hole a little bit with my file, make this nice and smooth. These are relief holes, right, so that we don't have sharp corners which could cause cracks long term. So the relief hole, the rounded hole, distributes the stress so that it doesn't concentrate at a single sharp corner. That's why we drill relief holes like that. And when we're all done, that's what it will look like. We may need to trim a little bit off the edge of both sides to get this to fit properly. And we want to drill 4 holes into this area. And we'll use these holes to back drill into the uprights with 4 A4 rivets. And that will hold it in place. Let's go and see how this piece is going to install on the fuselage. Okay, I'm standing up through the access cover. Our 7F810B is going to go behind the uprights and against the uprights. And the top flange is the flange that is aimed up slightly. And the top of the flange is to be even with the top of the L angles. And with the 4 holes I drilled, I can back drill into the uprights, the 4 A4 rivets. I'm going to do that to both sides. In order to lay out the floor of the baggage area, we need to measure the width of the cabin all the way at the back up against the back end of the baggage area. And that will be our width at the rear. At the front, we know that the distance is 900 millimeters. So we need to plot out our dimensions onto the baggage floor. And here's how I laid out my rear baggage floor, 7F89B. At the very front is 900 millimeters. You can confirm that, but that should be about correct. Now I went and measured at the rear, all the way at the back of the baggage floor, and I came up with just about 800 millimeters, just a tad less than that. So I drew my lines for the cutout going from the 800 millimeters at the rear towards the 900 at the front, and I will trim this piece off, same with the other side. And then also up here, this is where the uprights along the cabin edges are, about 20 millimeters by about 40 some. You should measure that and then mark it off and trim that out. And then we'll go try and fit this in and see how well it fits. I've made my cuts, and I have fit this and trimmed it and got it just got it to fit very nicely. Now at this stage I want to go ahead and mark a rivet line 10 millimeters in from the edge on 3 sides, not the front. We're going to leave that to later. Another skin will overlap that. But go ahead and lay out a rivet line on the other 3 sides, 10 millimeters in, and pitch 40. Start with a size 40 drill bit, and then eventually they will take an A40 rivet. So I'm going to do all my holes, and then I can use that to drill through when I take it up to the fuselage and drill into the L angles. Don't forget, whenever you come to a corner, you have to first drill a relief hole to reduce stresses and potential cracks. And here's what the baggage compartment bottom looks like. Got it clecoed in. If you're having any trouble drilling, getting the drill into the area that's against the cabin walls, remember that an air drill has a much smaller, thinner body and makes it easier to drill when you come up against another surface. And the front lip we'll take care of when our next piece goes on top of it. Now, before we proceed, we need to trim the front longerons. Now, on the side, we want to follow the side skin up to the top and trim it off. Do this on both sides. You can simply use your snips and then a file to clean up the edges. Now when we go to the top, we want to go straight across, and so that cut should be made 90 degrees to the longeron itself. And we should prepare the top longeron gusset, 7F33 SP. Cut it out to dimensions in the plans. And we should also mark point A as the plans describe, point A, and label the forward direction as indicated in the plans. And if we do that to both sides, so that we know where point A is located and the forward direction. And we'll do this on both of them. Both of these pieces are identical. They're just going to be flipped around when we install them. And let's go ahead and put these in place. These will get installed at the upper front corner of the fuselage at the top. And with the forward arrow going forward to the front of the fuselage and our point A that we marked, this will mount the flat side into the very corner, and point A will come to the very front edge, and it will be placed just like that. And we can use a clamp to put this in place. And then all we have to do is drill through the top holes, which will eventually be A5, but for now we'll drill just size 40 holes and cleco them in place. Now we want to prepare 7F52SP, which is going to go along the inside edges of the fuselage. It's going to go just like this. However, before we install it, we need to mark and cut a diagonal line, 45-degree line from the corner over to the edge and use our bandsaw to cut this off. We're going to do this for both the left and the right side, and then we'll attach it up here. So I'm going to take this over to the bandsaw right now. And there I've made the 45-degree cutout with the bandsaw, and using the pre-drilled holes on the outside of the skin, I'm going to drill into the upright. Now, it also helps to draw a center line on the piece, on the flange, so that we can see the center line through the holes if you want. This one's pretty easy because we can also keep it lined up with the edge of the fuselage skin up here also. But we want to go ahead and use the pre-drilled holes in the edge using a number 40 drill bit and cleco this with, again, the upper point of our cutout up at the very top up here. Okay, now we're ready to fabricate our seat belt attachment for the shoulder harness, actually. And this is 7F55, and we want to first make sure we make a nice 40-millimeter diameter radius around here, or that's 20-millimeter radius, 40-millimeter diameter, and then drill a 5/16 hole in the center. And the top edge is going to go into the corner of the longeron, where we're going to have 3 rivets, and then we're going to have 3 rivets additionally, all A5, attach this to the side. So let's go take a look at the side corner of the fuselage. And there'll be one of these on each side. They're mirrors of each other. In other words, they're bent in opposite directions. And it will be located at the front up here. And what we want to do is locate these holes here, because this hole will be the center hole at the top of the bracket. So we'll locate it just like that. So this will go flat up into the corner, and we'll catch these 3 holes, with this one being the center hole right here. And that will go up just like that. And we need to drill those through the side of the fuselage skin, and then we're going to need an additional 3 holes, which we can place where we want down the edge there. So I'll go ahead and drill those. I back drilled through the skin and longeron for the first 3 holes, and then I marked 4 additional holes, which I will pre-drill on the workbench and then place back up there and then drill through into the side of the fuselage skin. So there will be a total of 7 A5 holes drilled ultimately. And then we will reproduce this for the other side of the fuselage. Now we are ready to prepare 7F5 3SP. And this has a top and a bottom. You want to be careful. The top has the wider open angle as opposed to the narrow angle on the bottom. But this thick piece of aluminum angle will go up at the top. Now, I had to trim mine in order to get it to fit, so you want it to be able to fit. Now, I removed the upright in order to get a good measurement up here from left to right, but basically it's going to be all the way to the top and in between the 2 fuselage skin sides, so you want to get that to fit nicely. And then put the upright back on, and with the upright back on, we get a fit like this. Now, what we want to do is draw a line on 7F5 3SP so we can eventually cut it out so that these 2 pieces, the upright and 7F5 3, match like a picture frame with this diagonal cut. Now before you mark the line, you may notice that the upright is kind of flexible and is not rigid. So what we want to do, use a straight edge against the side, and that will prevent this. As soon as we put the straight edge all the way across the side of the fuselage, that will become rigid now and it cannot move. Then we can mark accurately without having this move. So if we do this to both sides and get an accurate marking on our 7F53, then we can cut and remove that piece. Let's do that now using our bandsaw. And we have made our cut and cleaned it up with a file, and there we go. And so we want this to be flush and up against the top. So what we're going to do is clamp a plate on top of there to keep that flush on both corners. Now I've just used a clamp to ensure that the two surfaces of the upright and 7F53 are nice and flush. And I did that to both sides. And what we're going to do now is drill through the top, the pre-drilled holes in the top of the fuselage skin onto 7F53 while holding it carefully with these clamps positioned with relation to our uprights. And this is the rivet line that will be used to drill into 7F53 all the way across the top. After drilling just a couple holes, you should check that everything is still in good alignment before drilling the rest of the holes. And we want to install the uprights now, 7F11-5, and these are going to be attached to the inside bottom of the side skin, just like this, starting at the bottom flange. And before we actually go and drill any holes, it is important that the web of this part is even with the web of your 7F52. And what you can do is just take a straight edge of any type and lay that over both webs to get them nice and flat and straight. So be sure you either get a second person to help you or to clamp it down to get these nice and flat and straight. These need to be in line with the straight edge. And then we're going to put in ultimately A5 rivets. We'll start with the size 40 drill bit, but basically they're going to be spaced 25 millimeters apart between the top and the bottom of the upright. Here's an example of how I laid out the rivet line for drilling 7F11-5. Basically, I created a line that was 10 millimeters in from the edge, and then I located the end of the upright and marked them. And then our goal is to have our rivet locations spaced 25 millimeters apart. So I made sure that I moved 10 millimeters in from each end and then got as close as I could to creating 25 millimeter spacing using my adjustable rivet fan. Now they're not exactly 25 apart, but they're awfully close to it. And the purpose of the rivet fan is by adjusting this, I can get them very evenly spaced as close to 25 millimeters apart as possible. And then I will drill through this. I'll support this with a block of wood and drill and create my holes. And then when I get this all lined up nice and even, like we talked about, then I can drill through the skin and into the piece. I'll do this, I'll repeat this for the other side, of course. creating 7F11-4, which is a piece of extrusion made out of aluminum. And what we want to do is cut it to 495 millimeters lengthwise, 495. We're going to need 2 of these. And then what we want to do is from each end, mark off 80 millimeters from the end to this point and draw a diagonal line from the very corner to the upper edge up there. And this is 80 millimeters. We're going to do that at both ends. We're going to cut and remove that piece. And I did that at the other end, and it looks like this. Okay, so I have removed this piece. I did that using my bandsaw. And then I'm going to clean this up with some Scotch-Brite and make it all smooth and shiny and nice. So we need 2 pieces, so we're going to end up making 4 cuts, 2 from the ends of each of them. Our extrusion is going to be mounted across our 2 side angles here. It's going to be located across the surface of these 2. What we want to do as far as locating the proper placement for this is to measure up from the bottom of 7F52 up 195 millimeters and make a line. That line will be the very top of our extrusion. So I'm just going to temporarily hold it right up here. Then what we want to do is mark exactly where the part begins, and this one starts over here right on the extrusion. I'll place a mark here and a mark here. The purpose for this is that we're going to need to place 13 rivets between this line and the top, and 14 rivets equally spaced between this line and the bottom. And once we draw our rivet line on the extrusion and drill the holes, then we can come back, locate it at this line, and we're going to position it so that the edge is flush with the edge of these 2 pieces after we get the fuselage side perfectly straight, and it will hold everything nice and tight and straight. So let's go drill our extrusion. Now I marked which side is which. This is the side that needs 13 rivets, and this is the side that needs the 14 rivets. And here are the 2 lines that I drew. So the first step is going to be to draw a center line down the extrusion. I'll use my edge marker and carefully draw a center line all the way up and down, and then I will locate the locations of the rivet holes. So what I'm going to do next is determine how to lay out the rivet. Let's make this very simple. Our goal is to locate 14 rivets between the edge of our skin side channel and the top. So our first and last rivet needs to be 10 millimeters in from this line, and at the end here 10 millimeters from the edge. So that locates our first and last rivet. We need a total of 14 rivets between that first and last rivet. So what we should do is grab our rivet fence and count off 14 fingers, whatever they may be, and then place them at the first and last rivet mark that we made, and that will help us to locate all of the rivets evenly spaced out along that. Now you can use other techniques, but that's the easiest way. Just remember that we need 14 on this side and then 13 between this mark and the end over here. And here's what it should look like as it's now marked. Now make sure before you mount this that you have this correct. This is the edge of the extrusion, and this will be the inside of the fuselage. So make sure you don't have the top and bottom reversed. When you go hold this back up to the fuselage, we'll reconfirm that we have the 13 at the top and the 14 at the bottom. But now what I'm going to do is use these marks and go ahead and drill size 40 holes in them, right at each of my tick marks, and then we'll be all set to take this up to and mount onto the fuselage side. And now we have it installed roughly where it's supposed to go. I've got my lines marked up at the gap. The edge is to be flush with the edge of our two vertical pieces. And notice that we have a bit of a floppy side, so what we're going to do is use a straight edge, and I'm going to put the straight edge up against the side of the fuselage and hold everything rigid, and now we have a nice straight side, and then and only then we can line up our piece again to be flush with the edge and go ahead and, using the extrusion as a guide for our drilling our holes, go ahead and drill and cleco all of these holes, and that will give us a nice straight solid edge. Okay, we need to fabricate the wing attach bracket 7F51SP. So I've laid this out on my 1/8" aluminum plate, and just by using the plans I have sketched out the actual size. Now the critical part of this is we want to make sure we draw a 6mm radius circle here, which is equivalent to closely to a 1/2" drill. We want to drill that out so that we get the proper radius there, right? We don't want any sharp corners. And then also the large radius here, which is a 18" radius or 18mm radius or 36mm diameter circle. And basically I'm just going to use my bandsaw to cut this out. I'll cut it out very rough and then come back and do a nicer job. My first step is going to be to drill a hole, 1/2" hole, exactly right there, so that we get the nice curve we want in that corner. I've drilled the hole, and now I'm going to go ahead with the bandsaw and make a rough cut. All right, and now I'm going to very carefully start cutting this out and cleaning up around the edge here, and between my bandsaw and belt sander we'll get this looking real nice. This is certainly an important piece, and then we'll verify the dimensions against the plan, and if all works out well we'll just make a second one of them. And there, I finished it off. I also used my Scotch-Brite wheel along all the edges to make it nice and smooth and get out all the nicks. That's certainly a critical piece that holds your wings on, so you want to make sure there aren't any deep gouges or scratches or nicks either in the edge or on the sides. Just makes it as strong as possible. And now I'm just going to go make a second one. Study the plans carefully and lay out all of the holes. There will be a series of holes we won't drill right now in this area. That's also on the plans. But do be as precise as possible in locating these holes and drill them to a size 40, all of them. There should be 9 holes, not including the one for the wing attachment. So I've drilled a total of 10 holes here. We will later drill 3 other holes after the bracket is attached. Now it's time to position and mount 7F51, our wing attach brackets. We now are going to use this surface to mount and attach our 7F51 wing bracket. Now the position for this is such that it's going to go all the way flat to the top, and then the other decision you have is going to be the distance in this direction. And it's actually pretty easy. We want to simply measure from the center of our fuselage over to our mounting hole, and that measurement should be 510 millimeters. So we want to position this so that the hole is 510 millimeters from the center of the fuselage. So use your tape measure, and you can go ahead and clamp this to make it easier. Now remember, this will tie together these two sides ultimately. And then if I measure to the center, and we'll get right on the 510. So again, keep the top flush and the distance to make the 510. And notice that the edge will not be even or necessarily straight with the edge with the side of the fuselage. But do adjust this to get the measurement here. Don't worry about the angles. They will not match up over here. And once you've done that and clamped it in place, you can go ahead and use the holes as pilot holes and drill in a number 40 and cleco with all of the available holes. So part of it will attach in here, and part of the holes will attach down in this member down here. I want to do that for both sides. And if you want, you can remove this guy, it's only clecoed in place, right, in order to drill some of these holes, because this might be in the way of your drill bit to get a nice square shot into these upper holes. Okay, we're going to set up 7F5-6, and we want to make sure that this piece is installed properly. The side with the right angle goes towards the center of the fuselage, and it's going to go along the pre-drilled skin holes in the side on both sides. And the only special preparation we need to do is to cut a slot in it because of the lip over here. So I've made a mark here, and the way it's easy to make a mark if you just set it against the sheet, and where the lip of 7F52 intersects is where you want to make that mark. And remember, this lip angles in slightly, so you're going to want a slight angle in when you draw that. And basically, I'm going to drill about a size 30 hole right at the end of that line, and then use my snips and carefully make two thin cuts along the line so that I have a wide enough slot to be able to slip it into this lip here. So let's take a look at that. Okay, here I drilled the slot, drilled a number 30 hole right here, and then used my tin snips on either side of the line to connect the hole. And don't forget, the 90-degree angle goes towards the inside of the fuselage, and on the outside edge, don't forget to draw a center line so that you can find the center through the pre-drilled holes in the side of the skin. So this goes towards the side of the skin, and the 90-degree side goes towards the inside of, towards the center, the inside of the fuselage. So there is a left and a right part for 7F5-6. They're just mirror opposites of each other. And now we can prepare the baggage bottom shelf, 7F5-7. At the bottom of the screen we have the front lip, And we have to do some trimming at the rear corners. At 250 millimeters from the front, we need to make a cutout. And if you follow your plans, you'll see you got 85 millimeters from the edge and 55 from the back. We'll cut out this piece. It is important to first drill roughly a ½ inch hole here so that we get the radius and no sharp corners. So I'll draw the hole first and then cut up to the edge of the hole. And we're going to do that on both sides. And you may also have to end up trimming off the edge if necessary. If the piece is too wide, you'll find out when you try and place that inside the fuselage. And here it is with the cutouts. Notice the radiused corner. And we're ready to place this inside the fuselage. Make a 10 millimeter line from the edge on both sides and mark pitch 40 for rivets that will go in there. We'll drill those a little bit later. And then we need to cut an L, a piece of our L stock, to the exact same width as the front lip, and this will be inserted in the front lip to reinforce it. And what we're going to do is drill through the top. Now don't mark the top. Instead, let's flip this over. And it is much easier to mark underneath on the bottom of the L after we've clamped it securely in the lip. And draw a center line on the L and then mark our rivets pitch 40 millimeters apart. And what we'll do then is drill through these marks and into the baggage bottom and cleco with the size 40 drill bit for now. Now we're going to zoom in on 7/8-10, the lip, the underside of the lip. And you will notice I have drawn a center line on the lip and then marked off every 40 millimeters a mark. What we need to do is drill through each of these marks, drilling straight up through the lip. And what that will do then is drill through the floor Now notice I've installed the front of the baggage floor, but notice how I've slipped its rear edge underneath the front edge of the rear baggage floor. The reason I did that is that I can now go ahead and drill through the holes that I made in the rear baggage floor down into the top of the front baggage floor. Eventually, I will reverse this and put the front baggage floor on top of the rear baggage floor after I drill all of those holes. Does that make sense? It is important that we keep the front of the baggage floor nice and flat with the edge of the fuselage. So if you want to use a straight edge of some sort, and make sure that stays nice and flat, because the back of our seat will eventually go flush over both of these surfaces. So on both sides, before you start drilling the back of the baggage floor, make sure you do have it lined up nice and straight on both sides. And after drilling the back of the baggage floor from the bottom, you'll come up top, and on both sides drill along the edge line with your size 40 drill and cleco. I removed the front baggage bottom panel, and I want you to notice that after drilling the rear edge, I noticed that my rear edge extends pretty far beyond that last line of holes. So I drew a line that was about 10 millimeters beyond the holes, and I will trim that piece. We don't want too much metal beyond the holes, as it won't be held very tight. In preparation for installing the seat back 7F64 right in here, we want to first mark a line 435 millimeters from the top of the fuselage right across here, and do that on both sides. That is going to be the height of the floor of the baggage cabinet and the top of the seat back 7F64. The other thing we want to do is to prepare the our aluminum extrusions by removing all of the clecos except for a couple at the bottom. We'll leave those in, but then remove all of the ones up above there, because we're going to slip in the seat back underneath the extrusion but in front of the stiffener on both sides. And let's install. Now first you want to cut 7F6-4 to proper size, and then let's install it. And 7F64 has a narrow and a long end. We want the long end on the bottom. And what we're going to do now is slip it underneath our extrusions on both sides. Keeping it roughly centered. And notice that we will have moved it down enough when we hit the line on both sides that was 435 from the top. And we'll adjust that just perfectly. Now, you can imagine what we're going to do next. After we have it lined up just right, we're going to attach it by drilling through the extrusions very carefully, because when you drill through the extrusion, you will obviously puncture through the seat back, but then you kind of want to stop once you've drilled the hole through the seat back, and then carefully find the hole in the stiffener behind, and then put a cleco through. And once you've done that up and down the extrusion, you will have attached the seat back just perfectly fine. After lining the top of the seat back up with the lines at the top on both sides, drill through one of the bottom holes near one of the corners of the seat back, and then stop, recheck your alignment up at the opposite corner, and then your next drill, the next hole you make should be on the opposite side at the opposite corner. Now, if you can, reach up underneath the seat back with your drill and back drill through the stiffener and then out the front. That way you will for sure get proper alignment, and then you can put the cleco through the corresponding hole in the stiffener. Once you've gotten the two corners properly drilled and you're happy with the alignment, then you can go ahead and drill the rest of the holes on both sides of the extrusion up and down. Once you've got a few holes drilled and the clecos attached, then the rest of them will go relatively quickly and easily by drilling simply through the front of the extrusion into the back stiffener. Along the top of the seat back, we want to draw a line 10 millimeters from the top and create a rivet line. It's going to be pitched 40 millimeters, and these are going to be A4 rivets ultimately. Also, you want to make sure you hold the bottom of the baggage compartment level with the top of the seat back while you're drilling these holes, because that will tie the seat back and the baggage bottom together up at this lip. Now, while laying out your rivet line, I do recommend one little extra thing here. Find the center from left to right along that rivet line, and then measure over to the left and to the right 270 millimeters. That location at 270 millimeters is where there will be a vertical L being attached at the rear. So the reason I point this out is that as you lay out your rivet line, you want to make sure that you don't place a rivet at that location. 270 millimeters this direction and the other direction from the center. You notice how my rivets are straddling that location, so there will be no interference. You can also draw a line at the edge for trimming. Notice my seat back extended beyond the aluminum extrusion, so I'm going to trim that excess off, and I've just drawn a red line so I can trim that off very neatly when I finally disassemble it for deburring, because it should line up evenly with the outer edge of the extrusion. Also want to mark 4 rivets above the extrusion along the same line. The 4th one being at the very top corner, and then 3 more down, spaced evenly between that top corner and the top of the extrusion on both sides. And those will be A4 rivets placed there. And now it's time to prepare 7F44, the top skin doubler. You should drill 12 pilot holes evenly spaced around, and just follow the plans for the dimensions. I drew a couple of center lines which will help me position it on top of the skin. And its final location should be pretty obvious at the rear top of your fuselage. And you'll use size 40 drill to initially drill through the doubler into the top of the skin, and then eventually this will get A4 rivets at those 12 locations. And at the rear of the fuselage, we need to install an L, a simple L, underneath the top skin at the back. Something like this will do just fine. And we'll drill through the pre-drilled holes in the top of the skin. Now it's time to use the plans and cut out and design 7F3-4. It's important to lay this out, cut it out accurately, and then what I've done here is laid out where the holes will be drilled, and the plans will specify exactly how they're to be laid out. I will drill a number size 40 drill bit through these locations, and this line up here is the 30 millimeters from the top, and we'll use that as a gauge when we mount this on the fuselage. This is the tail attach bracket to the fuselage. Do not drill the hole up here. We'll do that much later when we attach the horizontal tail. We need 4 of these, and I have the holes drilled. I should have mentioned that I used my bandsaw to cut this out. This is 63 thousandths aluminum, and so the bandsaw is really the only tool that will do a nice job cutting this out. Let's take this up to the fuselage and get it ready for mounting. Okay, since we made 4 of them, 2 will go on each side, and they're easy to locate where they're going to go. At our line of vertical rivets, one will go right up here, and the other one will go right above the other row of vertical rivets, right up here. So let's mount the first one. I'll choose to mount the first one at the forward location, which will be right here. I've drawn just a small vertical line down the center of the rivets. You can barely see that line. The reason I did that is that will allow me to get the location right from left to right. I'll line it up there. Now, our line up here that I drew 30 millimeters from the top gets even with the top of the longeron. So that adjusts my up and down until I get that line even with up there. Now, I'm going to use a square to help me line this up. So the square will keep everything nice and true, and that will be the location then. And then I'm just going to go ahead and drill through the number 40 holes. The top 3 holes go into the longeron, and the rest of these go into the side of the fuselage. Notice that the center line was actually going to go into the internal bulkhead flange. That's what these rivets below here are for. And then these 3 rivets will just go into the side. And actually this rivet here will catch the diagonal L that was placed inside. And we repeat these for the other 3 locations. And here I've drilled all the holes into the side of the fuselage. And actually, what's more important, in my opinion, than having this line exactly even with the top of the fuselage is to really make sure that these 3 holes honor the 10 millimeter edge distance of your longeron. In other words, don't make these holes too close to the bottom edge of the longeron here, right? It's important to leave the 10 millimeter, you know, for the best strength, to leave 10 millimeters minimum from the edge up. So that's the most important in positioning this. And if this ends up being too tall up here, we can always cut that down later. Eventually, all 9 of these holes will be filled with A5 rivets, and we can enlarge those later. Important is to not rivet this on yet. Leave this clecoed, because as we install the horizontal tail, it'll be much easier to be able to take these on and off to get that all positioned. We need to add a couple of holes to 7F6-1. 120 millimeters from each edge and 20 millimeters from the top, we need to drill a 1/2 inch hole, both sides, and our rudder cables will pass through these locations. We need one of these on both sides. At this time, you can trim the ends of the longeron to make them look nice and flush with the edge of the skin. The best way to trim these is to trim them long by, let's say, 1/2 inch, and then go back and trim them again. And that will help to prevent distorting the final edge. And the very final edge, of course, should be dressed with a file and make it look nice. The top can also be trimmed 90 degrees perpendicular to the axis of the longeron. Well, we've come to the stage where we're about finished with the rear fuselage, and we're going to need to disassemble everything that we've clecoed together and deburr and prime, or corrosion protect, that is, apply our corrosion protection. But before we do that, let's confirm which holes need to be drilled out to their full size. Now, everything we've drilled needs to be sized for an A4 rivet, except, and what we'll point out here are the exceptions. For example, along the very front here, these are all going to be A5, except we don't want to rivet these. We're going to hold off on this area where I have it marked skip until later on into another assembly. But as we go up 7F5-2, all of these will be drilled for an A5 rivet, size 20 drill, of course. So all of those all the way up to the very corner. And in addition to that, 7F5-4 up and down is also going to be all A5 from the very top all the way down to the bottom. And from 754 all the way forward along the longeron, those will also be all A5. And there's just one rivet we want to skip for now, and that's this one in the longeron. That's at the bottom of these holes. We've yet to put an L angle there. We'll save that till a little bit later. And another area that we want to be sure we get our A5 holes in is up at the top where our seat belt attachment goes. Remember, we had some additional holes for that. Those also need to be A5 size. In addition, along the top longeron from the very front all the way back to 7F5-4, all of those need to be A5 also. The rest can be A4. Now let's go look at the front of the fuselage. A5 rivets are going to end up in our extrusion that we drilled. So all of the little holes on the uprights, all of those are going to be drilled A5. And then the rest for the seat back are all A4s. And by the way, do not rivet any of the holes in the metal, in the aluminum extrusion. Those will remain clecoed, drilled to an A5 rivet hole size, but not riveted yet. We're going to have some further attachments later on. Also up at the wing attach brackets, that will all be A5, and we can rivet those. Those will all be A5. Let's go to the top of the fuselage and review what needs to be riveted A5. At the very top of the fuselage, on top of that gusset, those are all A5. The rest down the row here are A4s. But then also A5 will be our top longeron all the way back to where 7F5-4 comes into play. But those will also be A5 all the way up to the corner. Also, do not rivet any of the holes in the seat back at this time. We need to be able to completely remove the seat back if necessary. So we will leave all of, as we mentioned, these guys unriveted, and also these guys up here. You can confirm the proper rivet sizes and, of course, the size of the hole that needs to be drilled for those rivet sizes in your plan. So double check your plans if you have any doubt as to which is which. You now have the wonderful task of disassembling everything after you drill it out to the proper hole size. Disassemble everything, deburr it, clean it, polish any edges that you think need polishing up here, and any other rough edges on any of the metal, and then apply your corrosion protection to both surfaces where they meet or touch, and then re-cleco and rivet everything together using the proper rivets. Again, the most important thing is to not rivet any of these guys on the seat back, nor these guys right in here, and that's important. To point out, there are reasons why there are some gaps in the rivets that you may have noticed. In other words, if you look right in the center of the screen, you will notice that there's a blank area on 7F54 where there are no rivets. That's okay, that was by design. Later on, we will have an assembly, an extrusion come in from the inside of the skin and get riveted, so we will do that later. Here's another example of that. The gaps in the rivets along the bottom longeron, for example, right in this area. That's because we've yet to make a cutout for the rudder cable to exit the side of the fuselage.